Hi, I'm Sheila Kuehl. Welcome to Get Used to It, or today it's Get Political, because we have a wonderful guest who is the Cabinet Secretary and Deputy Chief of Staff to California's Governor Gray Davis, Susan Kennedy. Welcome, Susan.
It's great to be here.
I'm really glad you're here.
Oh, finally, after all this time.
Well, I freed you from all those terrible meetings.
You
where
did.
You
You dragged me out of
$90
the
billion and decide what's going to happen with all the water in California. Aren't you relieved to be here
I'm so
instead?
happy to be out of the office.
I believe it. Well, we're in Sacramento today because that's where we're both working at this particular time. But I really want to talk to you about Susan Kennedy. I mean, we do a series for this show that we call kind of it's about people's lives and not just about what they're doing this minute, because members of our community...
I've watched your show.
You have?
I'm a fan of your show. It was late night TV in Washington, D.C.
See, I didn't even know that and asked you to do the show. That's good. Well, I've known you a long time, I think, in a lot of avatars, all of them really political, but I'm certain that you weren't born political, or maybe you did grow up political.
My last name is Kennedy.
Kennedy, right, of course. So where were you born and where did this all start?
I was born in New Jersey. And I've spent many years erasing the accent, so most people don't, unless I get around someone from New Jersey. But I was born and raised in New Jersey up until about 8th grade, 9th grade, and then I moved to Pennsylvania. My father moved there for work, and it was quite a transition going from little Catholic school in New Jersey to a public school in New Jersey, which really hardened me to the Amish country. So I had this real, in and out of the fire experience.
So you started out going to Catholic school in New Jersey?
A small Catholic school, Holy Cross, and then into a very large public high school, middle school. 8th grade was when I went into public school.
What did your folks do?
My father worked for RCA Electronics. He was a troubleshooter. I never knew what he actually did, but he called him a troubleshooter. And my mother was deaf and didn't work during my growing up until I was an adult. And after all her kids were grown, she went back to work as a secretary in the local school, again, a little Catholic school, and she loved it. I mean, she just loved going to work. I think she was very unhappy not working all those years. So it was great to see her go back.
My mom was kind of like that too, and she had worked before she got married and then didn't work again, but really valued that kind of identity, it gave her doing work.
I know, I can't believe we both just did that, as if my mother didn't work for all those years,
I know, with
right. 4 kids. So sorry about that.
Didn't work for money. It
didn't work for money, but worked her tail off. But it was good to see her have friends, and that's the social life that comes with work, and
right.
the identity of getting up every day and doing something. In her case, she worked with kids. And my mother passed away, it was 1989, and when one of the things that school did for the funeral was all the kids in the school took this little notebook and drew pictures that reminded them of her, some situation. They wrote, "Thank you, Mrs. Kennedy," and that was the most emotional thing I treasure that, because it had all these pictures of these strange red colors. My mother had red hair, and putting Band-Aids and giving them aspirin or calling their mother or something like that. But she touched the lives of so many. I remember my school nurse when I was growing up, so I know the impact of that friendly face, and they loved my mother. So
were your folks political in any way?
Oh, I didn't even know if my parents were registered to vote until after they were both passed.
Huh.
When I was going through their things.
So nothing you inhaled from the womb then?
Far the opposite,
led you
I think.
in this direction? Completely
the opposite.
So what was your life like in Pennsylvania?
Well, that was a period of respite for me. After the 3 years I spent on the New Jersey shore, there was a lot of drugs, a lot of action, a lot of kids in my school were very heavy drinking, and so it was a very difficult transition for me to go from a very small school, small set of friends, into this action-packed, dangerous world on the Jersey Shore, is what it felt like, and I had a real hard time with that. So
how did you cope with it?
I don't think I coped very well. I never fit in properly, partly because I was gay and I didn't know it at the time, or I wasn't out, and so I just never fit in the way everyone else fit in, but also because I never liked the drugs. I I didn't fit in with that. I just I couldn't tolerate them as well. And so I wasn't quite the party girl in that atmosphere. So I muddled along as best I could, but I just hated that. I hated my life at that point in time.
So you must have been relieved then to go off
Yeah,
into
I actually
Amish country, as you called it.
Yeah, I actually have a piece of my journal from, I remember sitting in the Treadway Inn in Pennsylvania waiting for the house to be finished, carpeted, before we moved in, and I wrote this long piece about the quiet. You know, it was about 11 o'clock at night. I was writing about just the blessedness of the silence, and I didn't have all the pressure of all the drinking and all the drugs around me on a daily basis. And I was going into my junior year in high school, so it was a very, influential year, influential age for me, and it allowed me to get my head on straight to a degree. It was a life-saving move, I think.
Well, but not quite straight, hey?
Not that straight.
It's interesting. I think that there are probably a lot of people involved in our government in California that really have no idea that you're lesbian, nor would it probably matter that much to them. But I don't know whether your experience is the same as mine, but as I became more and more aware that I was, the first sense that I had was this sense of kind of like, oh my God, I'll never be happy in life. It was such a horrible thing to be.
Oh
but
God, me too.
You knew early on too?
I knew from my earliest days of cognizant movement with other people that there was something different about me. I now can look back and I can recognize what that feeling was. But when I started to realize that it was because I was gay, I remember, when I grew up in Catholic school, so I prayed a lot when I was a kid. I was like, please don't make me gay. I'd do anything but make me gay. I can't. I just don't want to live with that, And he didn't listen, so.
No.
But so it was. Yeah, I remember the foreboding of, oh God, if just anything but that, because I don't want to have to live with that.
So were you an activist of any kind in high school? Did you get involved in stuff? Because it seemed like after you came to California, as I know, that you did. And do you see anything looking back that you started to feel that you needed to be involved in stuff?
I was a rabble rouser. Everything had the potential to become political. My hero growing up was Jane Fonda. And it wasn't because I saw Barbarella. It's like I never saw any of her movies. It was I would read in the paper and see on the television news when I was growing up that she was doing all these things that to help the Indians and for environmental rights and to stop the war and everything. And I was too young to even understand the politics of the war. But the concept that she was doing things that made her terribly unpopular, but she did them anyway for some greater good, was a mind-blowing concept for a 12-year-old. And I remember when she won the Academy Award for Clute in 1972, and the picture in the paper with a little caption on there, the left-wing actress, and I went and asked my father, Dad, what does left-wing mean? He said, it means bad. So I had a sense of, I was attracted to people doing things for the greater good, but there wasn't a single issue that motivated me. And I found that when I was growing up, or high school, when we went to Pennsylvania, they had some rule. I can't remember what it was, but it was some kind of a dress code that I just thought was idiotic. I just thought it was unfair. So I started a petition campaign, and I got it overturned. They thought it was crazy to even try. But I don't think anyone had ever challenged the authority before, And so I developed this reputation as a bit of a rabble rouser. I wasn't doing anything radical, but just I didn't accept the status quo, and I was willing to stand up and challenge it. I gave the graduating speech for my high school class, and I was not valedictorian. I challenged the fact that the valedictorian was giving the speech for this class because we graduated early, and I took double courses towards the end, so we had a small group of us who graduated in January instead of the traditional May or June ceremony, and they were going to have the valedictorian give the speech for our class, and I said, no, and I went to the principal and brought a bunch of petitions and everything, and they just didn't even want to take me on. So they let people write speeches and submit them, and I won. So I gave the speech for my class. So just challenging the status quo was a natural thing for me, and I got an adrenaline rush off of doing it, and positive feedback about everything I did. So no, I can't say I grew up political, but politics was in my veins.
Well, it's interesting because sometimes, I mean, it's hard sometimes to know what came first with people. Sometimes they just get this urge to do. You know, I mean, where other people, their motto might be, I think, therefore I am. For me, it's like, I do, therefore I am.
Right.
And just do it.
Well, my father, one of the, probably the most important thing, not probably, absolutely, the most important thing that he instilled in me was the belief that there is nothing that I can't do if I set my mind to it. That the only limitations are the ones I place on myself. And that's a pretty powerful thing to grow up believing, whether it's, you know, physically climbing something you're not big enough to think you can climb, or whether it's challenging authority by asking questions you're not supposed to be asking. I remember at Catholic school, Catholic church, whenever I would ask the questions about, you know, Dad, why do they have the American flag inside the church? Isn't God the God of all people? He'd say, go ask Father Donnelly. He'd send me to Father Donnelly, and I'd go ask him, and they'd say it's faith. You know, I had to go back like 3 times with these questions, you know, and he just kept sending me to Father Donnelly. He got a kick out of it, but he encouraged that kind of questioning and that kind of, you know, challenging whatever. And so that was the most valuable thing that I learned as a child growing up. It took shape around issues later on in life, you know, where they actually meant something in terms of the greater good. I wasn't just stretching my wings anymore, but it was 1978, the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant had the problem, and we lived within the, this is in Pennsylvania obviously, when I was there, we lived within the evacuation radius. Now they didn't actually have an evacuation, but they had outlined and they had planned and everything, and I was within that couple miles from the plant. The government was saying that the releases of water and into the Susquehanna River and the air there a little bit of radioactivity in there, but it was under all the safety levels, and they kept telling us this over and over again. The whole place was in a near panic, just trying, kind of shocked panic, and there was the Sierra Club out there with Geiger counters on the street corners taking readings and saying, that's not true. I mean, what they said is absolutely wrong about what was released just now, or, you know, today or yesterday. So the realization that our safety was in jeopardy, or they just simply weren't giving us the information we were entitled to, that was a shock to my system, and it gave shape to my politics. So it gave me a cause that I didn't have before. I was just a rabble-rouser before, and then it became a cause. And luckily there were organizations to hook into, again, back to Jane Fonda, Tom Hayden and Jane's organization, Campaign for Economic Democracy. I got hooked up with them, and when I moved out to California, their environmental justice campaign, and that was a very powerful learning experience for me.
And what drew you to California, though? Was that it?
No, I followed my big brother.
Oh, yeah. Your big brother was already out here.
Yeah, he had been out here about 5 years before I went out to California, and I just followed him. He's my big brother.
So you finished high school, kind of didn't know what to do next.
Finished high school.
I
went to college for a little bit in Pennsylvania, but you know, I had graduated early from high school and immediately leapt into college there with no mentoring at all. My parents didn't go to college. They didn't know how to go to college, so they can't really help you go through the process. And so I jumped in and started taking, you know, Psychology 300 courses as my very first courses. You know, all of my classes, they wouldn't have even counted because I didn't take the prerequisites, but nobody stopped me. So I took all these classes. I was great, but I got overwhelmed and I got way into the frat life, and next thing you know, I'm having too much fun, and so I ended up not finishing that semester. So that was a not very successful foray into college life. There was really nothing to keep me in Pennsylvania. So
but it sounds like you really threw yourself into everything you did. I mean, I know you, and that's what you do. But it was it's interesting that you would be drawn to California. But I guess because your brother was here,
I would have probably done it anyway. But he just made it easy, because I would have, if he had gone to Alaska, I might have followed him to Alaska. But California was, I don't know if I would have even read about California or heard about California had he not been there. But he was sending pictures and he was talking about it, so it was just inevitable. I just remember I was always going to California as soon as my brother went out there. And as soon as I was 18, I think right before I turned 18, I left home and went traveling. I lived in Florida for about 6 months with a couple of friends, and then started driving across country. And I think I was 17, actually. I didn't make it all the way across country. The VW van broke down. I had to limp home, work for the summer and get some more money back. And then I finally left. I set a date certain that I was going out to California. So I was waiting. I didn't get my last paycheck from this tree nursery I was working in. But I was so determined to get in the car and go that I left without my paycheck. And I told my mother, I need you to wire me the money or something. We didn't even know how to wire at the time. I made it as far as Indiana before I had too little gas and no money left. So, luckily I had friends nearby there, so I ended up staying there for a couple of days. And then when I was waiting there, I don't even remember what the details were, but I couldn't stay there, and my mother couldn't get me. I had to wait like a week to get some money. And so I got in my car, and I had just enough gas left basically to make it to Manhattan, Kansas. That was the end of the road. And I ended up camping on an Army base for $2 a night, because the only place that I had $6 left, and it was the only place that where camping was less than $5 a night. And I brought this bag of beans and a bag of rice that I had no idea how to cook this. I didn't even know that beans were that hard to cook, actually. But I engendered such sympathy by my fellow campers that I came out in the morning and there was a cooler of eggs and bacon and food outside my tent. But anyway, so my check finally came in. It was a little bit of money, and it was enough to, I got up to Colorado and stayed there for about 6 months.
It sounds to me like your folks were very supportive of you. I mean, that you grew up. It's never perfect, but sort of confident.
I haven't really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. I mean, my parents were horrified. I mean, when I went to Florida, I got a ride from someone in an 18-wheeler. And my father was like, please let me buy you a train ticket or buy you a plane ticket. I was like, no, I really want to do this way. He let me go. I shudder to think what would have happened had something happened to me, what he would have done. He would have just been heartsick that he had allowed me to do that, but he knew he couldn't really stop me. And he knew, I don't know what he was thinking, but they did. They let me go, and they were very supportive.
Well, it's funny. I just feel like now looking back on my life, and people say, gee, you're so confident, and you're so sure of yourself, or you have so much self-esteem, and I think, well, it's really my folks. I mean, just like you said, mm-hmm. Your dad told you can do anything you want to do. That's really what my folks said to me. And I never really thought about what a gift it was. Yeah. Certainly they were critical at certain parts of my life, or horrified. Not too thrilled when they found out that I was gay, but I waited a very long time to tell them. So they had so much invested in me, they couldn't really throw me out at that point. But it really kind of gives you a real boost, I think. That you don't realize until you
don't realize
look back.
Until somebody points it out. Wow, you can walk on water. Oh, I didn't even realize that.
So did you know at this point in your life, as you're traveling out to California, that you were gay? And if you did they know?
I think I knew, but I was in denial, because I had a relationship in Pennsylvania right before I left. And but we were both in denial. We were actually, my girlfriend, my best friend, was dating my roommate, this man, and she and I had a very brief affair, but it was always kind of triangulated, mm-hmm. and so it wasn't real. So I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was to me at the time, but I knew it was intriguing, and I knew that it was a life-changing recognition of something. And partly, I would imagine, the reason I left so quickly from Pennsylvania on my own, but nothing was very conscious in mm-hmm. me about that. So I didn't really think about it in any concrete terms. When I got out to California, I dated men, and I never really invested in any relationship. It just,
Did you get involved with Campaign for Economic Democracy right away?
Pretty soon. My first year out
So you
there.
were in L.A.?
Yeah, I was in L.A. for a couple of years. And
what drew you to that?
At that point, it was what I had learned about them after the 3 Mile Island accident. They had the Stop Environmental Cancer Project, and you know, I had followed Jane Fonda to a degree, just and it was her organization, and it just seemed like a natural fit. You know, I was invigorated. I wanted to do something political. I had made the connection between doing something political and doing something that benefited me and my community directly through the, you know, what happened at 3 Mile Island. And I couldn't even have told you what other games were in town. I just knew they were. So I made a couple of phone calls and went to a chapter meeting down in Santa Monica.
To get involved as a volunteer?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, I went down to the office actually, and I started volunteering, answering the phones, and within a couple of days I was organizing the people who were answering the phones. And I took it very seriously, so all of my time off, and I worked in restaurants at the time, I spent there. And that level of commitment generated a certain amount of responsibility, so they were treating me like a little staff person, you know, and then I was there were a lot of folks that were trying to take me under their wing to have me work with them. And I remember working with Michael Picker in the Stop Environmental Cancer Project, learned a great deal. I don't think I spent a long time, but I remember having the feeling of I could kind of pick and choose where I wanted to go because I was valuable. And I saw it at the time as just because I would spend that much time doing something. And I ended up working with Students for Economic Democracy. They had a conference they were putting together in Northern California, and I went up and volunteered and lived, you know, at UC Davis, lived on a floor in one of those domes out in UC Davis. Great experience, and it was a very successful conference. We called it Building the Student Movement of the 1980s. And even Tom Hayden would say, you know, there won't be a student movement in the 1980s, but he gave us all the encouragement. And we had Gloria Steinem and Zimmerman. I can't even remember who all we had, but it was a very successful conference, and I remember getting offered jobs after that, the union organizers and stuff, because the logistics of putting together a major, you know, hundreds of students over a 3-day period with speakers and logistics of picking them up at the airport and the press and stuff around it, I demonstrated a skill in that area that's very, very valuable in politics. And so people in politics were then attracted to me and offering me jobs. So that's how I made the transition into, you know, professional politics and away from restaurant work.
Did you see any conflict between, some people really feel there's a conflict between the kind of grassroots organizing and electoral politics. And I remember, especially in the 70s, that people would often talk about how they didn't want to have anything to do with electoral politics. It was all corrupt. That, you know, the organizing for advocacy was really where they wanted to go. And yet you kind of made the transition, at least it sounds almost seamless, where you were working in grassroots organizing.
I truly believe that to the extent they are separated, they are each worse for it. They belong together. And you're not effective in grassroots politics if you're not affecting either people's lives or people's lives through public policy. So and if you're in public policy and you're not in touch with what really happens, then it's an empty policy, or sometimes it's ineffective and it's a waste of money. So they really are hand in hand. And I think that my experience as a grassroots organizer made me a very valuable person in electoral politics.
So did you go then into an electoral sort of political job? You said, here's all these offers. You're working with SED.
In the beginning, I stayed in organizing. I ended up doing some work for some initiative at the time, you know, signature gathering. I was Northern California campus coordinator to gather signatures on an initiative. I ended up the Students for Economic Democracy organizer for Northern California for, I don't remember how long. My life is becoming very hard to calculate in time periods. Could have been 6 months, could have been 2 years. But that was fun, and I learned a lot from that. That was, how do you go onto a campus where all you have is a name on a little ripped up piece of paper and a phone number, and leave there a couple of weeks later with a chapter of your organization. You have to get them into a room, you have to convince them to do something, you have to organize them so that you can walk away and they'll stay together. And that was a fabulous learning experience for me, and one that probably the most valuable skill I ever learned.
So what came next?
I don't remember. I think what came next was California. I worked for California National Organization for Women.
Up north?
Yeah. And with SED, we did, divestiture in South Africa for apartheid. That was the main issue that I remember. And then when we went to, I stayed up north after we did the student conference. So I was doing most of my campus work in the Bay Area. And then I worked for California Now, doing fundraising for them. It was just barely post the ERA campaign. And, so they had, and I think that's where the focus turned electoral for me, because I remember the sentiment was everybody who didn't support the ERA, we're coming into an election year and you're going to pay for it.
Right, because it was only a few votes in a couple of states.
Right.
That really meant that the amendment
wasn't ratified. It was holding people responsible. Now, it was holding people responsible for the position they took, and there was it was pretty easy to raise money at the time, and so that's what we were doing, is running phone banks to raise money for an electoral campaign. But that was the nexus. That was the switch for me, for doing grassroots politics and then going into electoral politics. The connection between the two. So California Now was next.
But you ended up with the Democratic Party, didn't you, in California?
Yes.
I mean, working for them. A lot of us ended up with the Democratic Party, but...
Yeah, after I left California Now, I went to, by this time, it was SED, it was during my period at SED when I came out. So that of course changed my relationship to politics, and just, my personal life became political in that sense. So I enjoyed doing, California Now is working with women, so that was a great feeling for me at the time. I started working for the California Abortion Rights Action League. I did, in between that, before I went into California Abortion Rights Action League, I went back to school, San Francisco State, and got bored very quickly, but stuck it out for a little while, got some done, and then I had to have my political fix. I couldn't let an election go by. It's very tough going to college when you're a political activist, because you have, the finals in November.
Right.
The election campaign.
It's very inconvenient.
Yeah. And so it was very difficult, and I had a very interrupted education. But so I went to volunteer for a firm that was doing some electoral work for retaining the justices when the Republicans were going after Rose Bird and the other two justices. And I ended up volunteering with them full-time, same thing. And I didn't realize that it was probably the most prestigious political firm in the state. And people were lined up to get in there. And I learned a great deal. It was Marianne Andrasic, was her before she was married. Now she's Marianne Gaddy. One of the best fundraisers in the business. Taught me how to do real fundraising, not raffle tickets, but $150, $200, $1,000 a head for big dinners. And Wally McGuire taught me advance. The big advance. He did advance for the Pope, Hands Across America, the Camp David Accord. So that was just great, working with the best in the business, and those are great skills. So I did that, and then after that I went to CARAL, California Abortion Rights, and that's...
Except they didn't want you to leave necessarily, did they?
No, actually, they were offering me a full-time position, and they were not offering me a great deal of compensation for that. And there were these two women in this firm that were friends of mine who were counseling me behind closed doors. They close the door and say, "Don't take what they're offering you. You're worth more than that. Go in there and stand up." And I was like, "Okay." So I went in. I took all three partners were in there, and all three of them were ganging up on me, going, pressuring me to take this for a little bit of money. And I said, "No, I have another offer." And Wally, I love Wally McGuire, but he leans into me and he says, "Do you realize there are people lined up down the street to get into this firm?" And I said, "If that's your final offer, I have someplace else to be, but thank you. I've really enjoyed my time here." And I left. And I couldn't believe I just quit this firm. I can't believe I just walked out of this firm. And my friends were in the hallway going, "Yes," that I had done this. And
you went to NARAL for $2.50.
I did. I went for a third of the money, but Wally hired me back at 4 times what he was offering me as a consultant.
You become much more valuable when you go somewhere else.
But it did teach me the line where I know that my skills are more valuable than that, and I'm worth more money. And I think that was pretty much the sole reason I left, because it wasn't that I thought the CARAL offer was my next career move, But it ended up being my next career move. I didn't
Well, and
realize
it
that.
also ended up being a much more important issue.
Yes.
Suddenly.
It was personal, and when I got into Kuehl, they were looking for a field organizer for a pro-choice campaign, and I was one of the only women field organizers in the business. And this woman, executive director, kept calling me back, going, "You're the only name that keeps coming back to me. There's not that many women out there, and we really want a woman." So I took it, and it was shortly after I took the job as field organizer for Kuehl, Lewis Powell resigned from the Supreme Court. And all of a sudden, a slim 5-4 majority, pro-choice majority, with Ronald Reagan in office, became, everyone expected that the next appointment by Ronald Reagan would be the one that overturned Roe versus Wade. So the importance of abortion rights just skyrocketed, and it was a great time to be involved with the issue where, everything I did on a daily basis, I feel like I impacted, women's lives. I feel like I impacted, our body politic. So that was great. I spent 5 years there. I became the executive director not long after, about a year after I got there. And my counterpart in Kuehl in Southern California, which for those who don't know what Kuehl is, it's the National Abortion Rights Action League, only their California affiliate, and we're affiliated with NARAL. My California was broken up into North and South. My Southern California counterpart was Robin Schneider, who was the Southern California organizer for Students for Economic Democracy. So the two of us had...
These things keep coming back together.
And it was just magical because she and I had the exact same organizing experience. We knew exactly how to how to manage large crowds, but we had the electoral focus. So we turned Kuehl into a political electoral entity where it was not before. The organization when we got there had its membership on 3x5 cards. We had 2,500 members on 3x5, a little dog-eared, in the recipe box, where we kept our members. And when I left 5 years later, the 70,000 members, fully computerized, and was recognized as we were sought after for our endorsement in campaigns. And that was because of the issue. I mean, the issue sold itself. I mean, it was anybody could have, I think, led the organization at that point in time. But the key difference that Robin and I did was making it electoral. We didn't have a lot of money, so we couldn't play with the big boys in terms of making campaign contributions because we just didn't have the money, and we certainly didn't have the clout to give an endorsement. Nobody wanted who? They don't want our endorsement. But we had volunteers. We had bodies. And so we picked a couple of campaigns in targeted districts where it was going to be very marginal, and it was a pro-choice candidate against an anti-choice candidate. It was very clear cut. And we picked 2 up north and 2 down south. And I just worked my tail off to get busloads of people down there walking precincts. And we turned out in this race up in Northern California more people walking precincts than the entire AFL-CIO.
I think it's really easy to see why you would be considered valuable and why the work of organizing is valuable. And I want to explore some of the stuff that you've done since, because, lately, I mean, I know that you were with the Democratic Party here in California for a while, and I know that you really went national because you were working with Senator Feinstein as her press secretary. What was that like?
That was a great experience. I mean, they've all been. I sound like we're pretty redundant, but I was executive director of the Democratic Party for 3 years in California, and I ran the Get Out the Vote for the party in the '92 campaign, and that was great. I mean, no one thought we could elect 2 Jewish women from San Francisco, Democrats from San Francisco, and at the time George Bush was at 70–80% in the polls, and people thought we were just a joke. But we did it, and that was a great energetic exercise in turning perception on its head. And Phil Angelides was a fabulous chair, so he really made it happen. And then after the Democratic Party, I went to, I'm losing track of time, sometime after the Democratic Party, I went to Washington as Senator Feinstein's communications director and press secretary, and that was a great experience because it was a whole new ball game. I mean, the professionalism and I mean, at least at the party and everything else, you get to kind of create your surroundings, and you create your own little institution and how things operate, moving to that level where it's been around for 100 years, and the traditions and the way the staff operates and the way the staff operates with the members and with the press, I had to learn there was a big learning curve just in terms of which way the trains were coming so you wouldn't get run over. And it was the Republicans had just taken over Congress, so that was an interesting time to be there as a Democrat. But it was great because Dianne Feinstein is in some ways better in that situation because she's completely undaunted. She simply said, oh, okay, shifted her sights and started working with the power centers in order to get stuff done. And she was extremely effective, even though she was barely a freshman at the time. And she got along. She had a lot of respect. She carries an enormous amount of respect in Washington, and so that was a joy to work for such a powerful member of the Senate. And actually, the best experience I had in the Senate was right before the '96 Democratic Convention. All the women senators were supposed to appear at the Democratic Convention. All the women senators were supposed to appear together. And there were two things that happened during that. One was the arguments that the staff directors and the communications directors had over what they were going to wear. I'm wearing the red. No, you're not. I'm wearing red. No, look, my boss always wears blue in public. She's wearing the blue, then you can't stand next to her. Anyway, it was. I don't even think our bosses knew it. But that was one. But the best one was Annie Leibovitz came to the Senate to photograph all of the women of the Senate, and I sent my deputy down there to staff her, and I really wish I'd gone myself because I probably would have won a Pulitzer for this. He comes back up and he said, "You're not going to believe this. They wouldn't let any of the staff in the room, and so we all had to wait outside. Annie Leibovitz doesn't like anybody else, in the room with her, so we were all waiting outside. There were all these men staffing these women senators holding their purses, and they were holding them like this. It's like nobody would swing it on their shoulder. But just the flip of power to have all these men standing out there holding the purses for the senators was priceless, and I missed it. I can't believe it.
Well, it can't all just be cake and ice cream. I mean, I enjoy my life too, and it seems wonderful to me. And as I tell the story of my life, it's kind of like, and then this happened, and then they asked me to do this,
yeah,
and
right.
then they came and got me, and I don't know. And you know that you're very smart, and you know that you're very talented, but you must have bumped your nose against something. Something must have gone wrong. Something must have been difficult.
Well, I don't think it wasn't
you
that
can
it was
say
easy.
no. That's
well,
okay.
No, I can't think of something. I mean, it wasn't that it wasn't difficult. I think the most difficulty for me was merging or taking care of my personal life with such a roller coaster and skyrocketing career choice. I mean, I went from one very powerful job to another very powerful job, and there was no breathing space. I mean, it was, okay, do you want to be executive director of the Democratic Party? Start tomorrow. And next thing you know, we're running a campaign, and I've got 200 staff people. There was no downtime. You couldn't not concentrate on what you were doing. When I went to the Senate, I mean, it was just 12-hour days just to start, and then 14 to 16-hour days, no outside life. So that was good in terms of a career, bad in terms of a personal life. Both my parents died about a year and a half apart in 1989, 1990, right in the middle of the, actually it was 1989 and then 1991,
Mm-hmm.
right in the middle of doing the 92 campaign. And that was, and in 1989 it was right before the Webster versus Reproductive Health Services decision.
Right.
So we were in the apex of our organizing. And it was I just had to put my personal life in a box. Couldn't feel, and of course I crashed after that. I couldn't mourn the death of my mother because if I didn't have time to even think about it, and that has a tremendous personal toll. Mm-hmm. And my mother was in the hospital for a heart operation, and she died on the operating table. I didn't even know she was in the hospital.
Wow.
Now, my mother was deaf. We didn't talk on the phone for obvious reasons, and so we didn't keep in touch as much as we should have, and we were close. It wasn't that we weren't close. But, and my father didn't tell me she was going in for the operation. She had bypass surgery 10 years before, and she was going back in, and I knew it was coming up, but I didn't think it could. I thought it was at least a couple of weeks away. And for some reason she went in early, and my little sister kept telling my father, "Did you call people, and he said, no, I'll just call him when it's done. He just wanted to call with good news. Well, I got the call that she had died on the table, and it was a complete shock. I had no idea it was coming. The guilt of not even being able to say goodbye, or not even being there when she was scared, not even knowing that she was scared, that had a tremendous toll on me. And then luckily I learned my lesson a little bit and was with my father when he died. Actually, we helped him because he died of cancer, and it was very, very painful. And he died in my arms, and that was a life-changing experience. But those two deaths in such a close period of time taught me the most important lesson in my life, which is there's nothing in work that's more important than yourself or your family. Nothing.
Right.
And you can think that, but if you don't practice it, it doesn't mean anything. And my life changed after that. Nothing in politics got me nearly as energized as it used to. I wasn't able to do the 20-hour days in the complete absence of taking care of myself physically or emotionally. I wasn't capable. I just didn't have the energy to do that. And I think I went through a period of depression after that, so I couldn't feel anything for a while, but it really changed my life. And also, I got sober after that. My mother was an alcoholic, and I was an alcoholic, and very high functioning one. I mean, I worked at such high speeds, but I couldn't handle a lot of alcohol, and I crashed after my mother died, and it put me into recovery. I got myself into recovery, and then when I went to Washington, D.C., I really got sober, and with the help of some very dear friends. And those two things changed the order of priority in my life. I don't do things that are to my detriment or would jeopardize my sobriety. I'm in a wonderful relationship, and it wouldn't even occur to me to sacrifice my relationship or something my partner needs or wants just for work. She constantly says, when someday you find out you're going to die, a month from now, you're not going to sit there and say, gee, I wish I spent more time at work. I'm sure she didn't coin that phrase, but it's just so true. What do you want to look? I never ever want to look over my shoulder and wish I had.
Well, you have a very interesting juxtaposition now. I mean, I certainly knew you when you were doing the Democratic Party stuff, and I knew you working for DiFi, but now we work in the same building. You're on the first floor, I'm on the third floor, so I do actually get to see you more, and I'm envied for the friendship, because everyone perceives that you're very close to the governor, that he trusts you very much, and yet I'm not sure how many people know, but several people know that you're also planning to go to Hawaii in actually only a month or so for your commitment ceremony. And so you're either, deciding what everybody's going to get in the budget or planning your wedding, depending on what time of day someone calls you. And it is just what you're talking about. It's kind of a new and good balance, I think, for you. But to just unpack that for a minute, talk a little bit about the work that you're doing now.
Well, as cabinet secretary, my job is as secretary of the cabinet. All the agency secretaries, I liaison with them, so I'm their primary contact for the governor. And if the governor needs something out of I'm responsible for making sure that the governor never wakes up and reads in a newspaper something his agency or department is doing that he doesn't know about. And when they need an answer on whether or not a policy change, or they want to put in a budget change proposal, or an issue is coming up and they need some direction, they put it into me, and I run the traps. I run it through finance. Does it cost anything? Is it politically what we want to do? Is it, what are the policy implications? What are the legislative implications? And then 90% of the time I can say yes or no. 10% of the time I have to run it further up the flagpole and either let the governor know or ask the chief of staff to weigh in, and then we decide if the governor needs to be briefed in advance or make a decision or just be told about it. I think I do have his confidence, and I think that's because it is clear, even though I haven't known him that long, I didn't really know him until I worked for him directly, but he believes, and rightfully so, that my agenda is his agenda, and he doesn't question that. I pride myself on being a professional, so I don't have a hidden agenda. I have a perspective, and he values that perspective, and he solicits that perspective. But he knows that when I'm making a recommendation to him, he doesn't have to question if I have some political agenda or personal bias on something. I will only recommend what I think is in his best interest and the best interest of the administration. So it's an interesting place to be, and a very honored place to be, and I'm really lucky.
Well, I was thinking the other day, and thinking about this this interview to come, how fortunate a place is when it lacks homophobia, or when it lacks racism or sexism, because it really allows you to choose a person despite bad stuff and because of good stuff. I mean, Governor Gray Davis can say to himself, I need a person just like Susan Kennedy, you know, off of Susan Kennedy. And someone clearly would have said to him, Gray, but you know about her sexual orientation. And I know that Gray would say, and your point is? I mean, you know, not only because he doesn't have a homophobic bone in his body, but because he really does value bringing the best person in, and I think understands that that kind of prejudice is detrimental to the highest functioning of an administration.
Yeah, and I actually think that in some Democratic circles, not the least of which this one, there's those same advisors who were pointing things out. They're not saying it. Well, she's gay. They're saying, and she's a twofer.
It's a new century, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a new century. So I think in an enlightened administration, it's seen as an advantage, on top of being the best person for the job. Because there's quite a few gay and lesbian individuals in very high-ranking position in the administration, and it was never a question. They weren't looking for a gay person to fill a slot. It just so happens, and he knows a lot of people from the gay lesbian community. So he had a talented pool to tap from when looking for folks in the administration.
But now your commitment ceremonies, it ratchets it up a little bit in terms of profile. Not that you've ever been the story, because in your work with candidates, with elected officials, etc., you're a wonderful staffer. You have never been the story, and I don't think you'll become the story now. But it does bring it a little more public, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah, it does.
Is that a problem in any way,
the process of sending out invitations. I mean, there's a protocol, and I learned the hard way that you can hurt people's feelings. They're expecting to be invited to something like, if you're gonna have a ceremony that's anything beyond your immediate family, what's more important is who doesn't get invited. And so the process of sending out, I waited until the last minute to send out all the invitations to friends in the legislature, because I didn't want the buzz. But I walked into a lunch about 3 weeks ago with a bunch of legislators, and they were hugging me, going, "Oh, I hear you're getting married." And so it's like it went around the building like that.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I think it does raise the profile, and so far it hasn't changed anything. I'm waiting for a press story. I mean, when I first got this job, my friend called me from the San Francisco Chronicle, and they all excited, wanted to do a story on me, a profile story on me, and how important this appointment was to the gay community. I ripped her a new face. I said, you guys have known me San Francisco is my hometown paper. You've known me for a decade. I've done a lot of high-profile work. You've interviewed me constantly. You've even profiled me before for my work on abortion rights. And you didn't even write 2 column inches about my appointment, and you want to write a story about the fact that I'm gay? I said, that's an insult after all the work I've done. They didn't write it. Didn't call me back.
Well, you're pretty scary, Susan.
No, I'm not.
Well,
Come on, I'm 107 pounds and 5'2". Tell me
I
I'm
understand,
scary.
but I serve with 79 other state assembly members. There are 40 state senators. Okay, maybe scary's not the exact word, but you really do have, I mean, you told me when you were much younger, no, you told me a few days ago that when you were much younger, you kind of had to assume this kind of tough exterior. Now, I wouldn't say you have a tough exterior, but you're very focused. and very close to the governor. And those two things together, I think, would give anyone pause in terms of sort of, you know, crossing you. I mean, you've really gained a really solid reputation, but a great deal of confidence as well. And your point is,
I know. Question in there. It's like, I'm enjoying this.
Okay, I think you're kind of scary, but has anybody ever scared you?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I'll think of somebody in a minute. You scared me. You used to scare me.
No.
No, I swear to God, you used to scare me. Because you have a reputation for being incredibly, incredibly smart and sharp. And years ago, when I actually first met you, I was afraid to talk to you because you were very articulate, and I wasn't very articulate.
Well, I see I should have done the pre-interview better, because that was an answer I really wasn't expecting at all.
Never ask a question you don't know the answer to.
Yeah, that's what they taught us in law school.
You actually used to scare me. Who else? I can be scared by people. It not scared where it becomes a challenge. You know, if I don't know someone and they are they're very smart, and they have a place they want to be, and you only have 30 seconds to get your point across, or they're going to throw you out of the office. That's intimidating, you know. And so I had to learn, and I'm in that business. And being the executive director of the party or the communications director for the senator, I had to be able to carry my weight. I have cabinet secretaries who are almost twice my age, reporting to me. In some capacity. I mean, they report directly to the governor, but when I have to deliver something from the governor, sure. I know this one gentleman, wonderful man. I could tell it in his face. He was looking at me like, "You're a child, and you're dressing me down." It's like, no, I never dressed anybody down.
No, of course not.
But do you know what I mean? I mean, I had to put the shield and armor on to be able to go in and pull that off. And you said something to me like that last week about, you know, luckily you learned to be an actress first, because you had to go in and act as if. That is the magic. Being, you know, not showing that you're scared. Being able to go in and act as if, and then you get the respect.
Well, you have an extraordinary facility for having a 2-hour meeting in 10 minutes. I mean, you can get to the essence of something. It's kind of like cut to the chase, give me the information. And beyond that, to really synthesize the information. I mean, the work that I got to do with you last year on the whole HMO reform package, where we were, you know, my side and your side at first were not in agreement on how broad this was going to be, how narrow this was going to be, who was going to get what or whatever. And it would seem like you would listen for 5 minutes and you would get it. I mean, I can imagine if you go back into this meeting today about whether California is going to have any water or not, you will have grasped more details than anyone. It's a great facility, and I think a great skill. And I guess the question is, you've been kind of behind the camera, as it were, in most of your career. Do you think at all about running for office? About, you know, using, I won't say it's a better thing or going beyond. I mean, I think where you are is extremely important, but.
I used to, but I think two things. Politics has changed. I'm not willing to give up my personal life. What the sacrifice that you have to make in order to be an elected official is not one I'm willing to make. And I have nothing but respect for your ability to make that commitment, but it's just not worth it. I mean, I've worked on 30 campaigns, and I've seen people. You know, what can happen to people in the campaigns? They lose all privacy. You know, it's a dirty business, running campaigns, and I'm sure it'd be different if you were in front of, you know, if you're the candidate, you do it for belief, or you do it for the right reasons. But I've seen too much behind the scenes on a staff level in terms of how you know, you can be, I've seen fabulous candidates who deserved to be in office, who couldn't raise the money, and got slaughtered by people who just didn't deserve the time of day, you know, because the ability of money and negative campaigning to destroy somebody. I'm not willing to do that, you know. And I think, and also being gay, I'm not willing to make myself a target. It's just not worth it. And I can accomplish so much behind the scenes that I enjoy it. I mean, I'm not giving something up. I mean, I have a lot of respect, and I thought about running for office because, you know, that's where the action is. But there's a lot of action behind the scenes, and I found it's a creative place. There's more art, I think, being behind the scenes. It's not easy to create something. It's not easy to help an elected official create something, an image or a message, or help them get a message out to thousands or millions of people. You know, the craft involved in making that happen is pretty incredible. And doing it now for an administration. I mean, I was there from day one when there wasn't a paperclip to be found in the entire horseshoe. Not a paperclip, not a pen. And it was like little MASH units kept coming up in every pod of offices. Go find a pad and some paper, and let's have a meeting. You know? And you know, and no one knew what our phone numbers were. No one knew what, you know. It just took weeks to watch this government rise out of nothingness, and to shape an administration, to shape the policies, and to shape the message and stuff is just really powerful. I'm so lucky.
Well, I can't think of anything we'd have to say after that. It's really been wonderful having you here for our show. It's been wonderful having you here too, and to give you a look at the variety of who we are and what we do, because you might be next in the halls of power, so you better get used to it.